Good morning or good afternoon as it just is now, and you're very welcome to this NasCSO Roundtable that we at European Movement Ireland are delighted to be hosting with the European Parliament Liaison Office based in Ireland as well. And this will be an informal, we hope, roundtable where representatives from Irish CSOs like yourselves can share their experience of engagement at the European level as CSOs in Ireland with the MEPs who we have gathered here today. I'm Stephen O'Shea and I work as the Deputy CEO here at European Movement Ireland. And as I said, we're delighted to be working with the European Parliament Liaison Office to bring you this event. Here at European Movement Ireland, our mission is to develop and build connections between Ireland and Europe at all levels and to achieve greater public understanding by providing objective information and stimulating debate, which is what today is all about. And as part of that, over the last year or more, in cooperation with the European Parliament, we began a series of online meetings for Irish civil society organisations and members of the European Parliament under the NasCSO heading. We came up with that title because NASC is the Irish word for connection, and so NasCSO aims to build greater connections between CSOs and the Parliament, and particularly the Irish MEPs. We've held thematic meetings on the topics of equality and diversity, the Irish language, Gaeilge, and agriculture and fisheries for CSOs in these areas, and further meetings then were held in the three EU Parliament constituencies on local and regional issues. And we really wanted to follow up on these discussions and to re-engage or engage for the first time with your organisations. And that's why we're here today. We're delighted to be joined by 5 MEPs who you'll hear from in a moment. We have Barry Andrews from Dublin, Kieran Cuff also from Dublin, Colin Markey from Midlands Northwest, Grace O'Sullivan from the South constituency, and Maria Walsh from Midlands Northwest also. And in a moment, I'll give our MEPs the opportunity to introduce themselves, and following that there'll be lots of time for questions and open discussion. And during the event we will be taking some screenshots and posting on our social media channels, and we also urge panelists and participants to join the discussions on Twitter using the hashtag NasCSO and the handles EP in Ireland and EM Ireland. The opening part of this you will have seen as you joined. The opening part, including the MEP's remarks, will be recorded, but the discussion and Q&A section won't be recorded in order to facilitate free discussion. And as we begin now, I'd like to hand you over to Thomas Kramer, who's also joining us today. And Thomas is the Community Manager for the European Parliament Liaison Office in Ireland. So Thomas, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Stephen, and a very warm welcome from the European Parliament Office in Ireland to everyone. It's great to see that so many organisations actually want to be part of this event today, and I think I hope that can sort of be the building block again of sort of more cooperation between CSOs and then MEPs as well, and sort of bringing that European dimension really also into sort of the work of CSOs here in Ireland. And as Stephen said, we had sort of started this project called NasCSO in 2021, but we thought it was time to sort of to refresh the contacts and take it a bit further, and that's what we're doing today. And I would like to really thank very much all the MEPs that are joining us here today and who are taking some of their precious time on the sort of the days that they're not having to be in Brussels or Strasbourg. And what I will be sort of talking about a bit more later, but I don't want to take too much time up now, is that the European Parliament has built an engagement platform called together.eu, which initially started off for individuals, but we are extending that to CSOs, and there is interesting opportunities maybe to also connect across borders and particularly find sort of maybe like-minded organizations on the continent who one could work with together. But I'll be talking about that a bit later, because today you're here for sort of the opportunity to, I guess, like ask questions to MEPs, and I don't want to take up any more time on that. So I'll hand back to Stephen, and I'm really looking forward to the discussions today.
Thanks very much for that, Thomas. So we have a wide and varied audience with us today, which is great. It's great to see. One thing that may be helpful just for ourselves and for the MEPs is if you could do two things potentially. That's maybe in your name tag, say what organization you're representing. And also, actually, at this point, it would be great if you could type into the chat function who you are and what organization you're representing, and maybe where in the country you're based, just so we can sort of see that as we go along and have an idea of the various organizations that are represented here today. And as you do that, I'll start to hand over to our MEPs, and we're very grateful to have 5 of them with us today. They're going to introduce themselves and their work for about 5 minutes, and we'll move along in alphabetical order, starting with Barry Andrews, who's the Irish MEP representing the Dublin constituency. Barry's a member of the Fianna Fáil party, part of the Renew Europe group in the European Parliament, and he was previously a TD representing Dún Laoghaire. He served as a Minister of State for Children, CEO of Gaeilge, and Director General of the Institute of International and European Affairs. And Barry joined us previously in 2021 for our roundtable on equality and diversity, and for our Dublin constituency roundtable. So Barry, I'll hand over to you.
Hi, thank you, Stephen and Thomas, European Movement Ireland, and the EPLO for organising this morning, this afternoon, and delighted to see a few familiar faces from my own work in the Parliament and beforehand. So, quick introduction. I saw most of, in fact, I think I saw all of the MEPs yesterday on the flight back from. We were in Strasbourg for the week, and we all came back together more or less last night, and it was a busy Strasbourg, as it always is. And but I spoke a couple of occasions. Most of my work, I suppose, certainly my speaking time in the Parliament recent times, has been on the international development side of the House. So I'm a full member of that committee. I spoke this month on search and rescue. I spoke on Afghanistan, in particular the decision of the Taliban to exclude female workers from international local NGOs. And I also spoke on the Global Gateway, which is a new European Union initiative, I think essentially to try to rival the Belt and Road initiative that has gained such traction in developing countries from China. My other committee is the Trade Committee. My other main committee that I'm a full member of is the International Trade Committee, very much involved in the development of free trade agreements, but also in making more robust trading arrangements, more sustainable trading arrangements, and also defensive instruments to protect the European single market from predatory practices by some of our rivals. But I'm very much obsessed at the moment, and for the next 4 or 5 days, with a big vote that's taking place, big to me, in the Trade Committee, where I'm rapporteur on a legislative file called Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence. And the process of this is we as each of the committees have to give our views on what should be in this new law. We will then sit down with the council. We'll have to pass through the Parliament as well, and we'll sit down with the council and the commission and settle this new law. And essentially, it's around cleaning up supply chains to make sure that they don't cause environmental damage or lead to human rights abuses. And of course, in practical terms, that means when you go to buy something or obtain a service, you're confident that there hasn't been damage to the environment, there hasn't been breaches of basic human rights along the supply chain before you went to consume that product or service. So it's a really, really, really interesting file, but my vote on Tuesday is going to be extremely tight. So that's on my agenda as well. And two other things, very briefly. I have been appointed chief observer of for the European Union in the Nigeria election next month. It's Africa's largest democracy. It's the largest economy, and unfortunately, it's an election that's going to be marked by a lot of violence. And when I'm in Nigeria, we'll move around in armored vehicles. But it's a very important. I'm really, really delighted to take up that role. And finally, I'm chair of the SDG Alliance, the Sustainable Development Goals Alliance in the Parliament, which is an informal group of like-minded MEPs. Grace is a member of it, and we're actually this year is a big year for the SDGs. They were 2015 to 2030, Agenda 2030. We're midway, and there'll be every 4 years there's a summit of leaders across the world that'll take place in September in New York. So I'll have a meeting with President Metsola of the European Parliament next week on Wednesday to discuss the way the Parliament itself can play a role in making sure that we are leaders in this area of SDG implementation. So that's it in a quick nutshell, Stephen, and looking forward to the discussion.
Thanks very much, Barry. Now it's over to Kieran Cuff, who's also an MEP for Dublin for the Green Party. He focuses on climate action, housing and promoting walking and cycling. And he's also president of the European Forum for Renewable Energy Sources. And he's been involved in politics and activism since the 1980s. And Kieran trained as an architect and an urban planner. So Kieran, it's over to you.
Thanks very much for that introduction. And yeah, as you said, it's a busy time in the Parliament. And I think one of the key issues in this 5-year term is climate action. We talk a lot about the European Green Deal that was announced by Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the European Commission. But it's not just enough to talk about it, we need to make it happen. And that means new laws. And we have about 15 laws going through the Parliament to try and decarbonise industry, transport, construction, agriculture, energy, all of these sectors. And as we know from the Irish experience, this isn't easy. And if we look at the 27 member states, the 27 countries in the European Union, it is one heck of a challenge. And so what we do with these laws, as Barry points out, MEPs become rapporteurs or chief negotiators once we have a draft of the law from the European Commission. So Barry is the chief negotiator for one piece of legislation. I know my colleague Grace O'Sullivan will be the chief negotiator on an important file in the area of waste later on in the year. But currently I'm the rapporteur for a file which will decarbonize buildings. It's about bringing all the buildings in Europe up to an A energy rating by the year 2050. So that means providing incentives to refurbish or upgrade your home. It's all about starting with the poorest performing homes and targeting people who are living in fuel poverty. So that's where a lot of my work is going on at the moment. I'm trying to ensure I bring every country and all the MEPs with me. So Italy has got a bit upset about this. So I gave a speech in Italian during the week, trying to reassure my colleagues in Italy and explain how this will create green jobs. It'll give people warmer homes. It'll improve air quality. And I think we're going in the right direction. Another file I've been dealing with, again on decarbonisation, is jet fuel. Aviation is a big source of greenhouse gas emissions. So we're trying to move away from the conventional kerosene towards new types of fuels. Some of them will be biofuels, but more importantly, synthetic fuels that we'll make with green hydrogen, direct air capture. And I'm trying to ensure that we go in the right direction on this. But with any of the files that we deal with, there's always issues to do with disability, to do with young people, to do with defending democracy, an awful lot to do with protecting Ukraine, obviously, over the last 12 months. And I think from your perspective, it's always of interest, A, just to talk to us and have a general chat, but B, to look at the new laws that are being prepared at European Union level and drill down into a little bit of the detail and lobby us, because that's what everybody else is doing. And they come to us, they sit down, they give us very specific amendments, and they ask us to support them. And quite often for you as an Irish civil society organisation, you will have colleagues working in Brussels, you'll have umbrella networks. So I would say to you, work with them, tell us what your concerns are, and we will do our best to address them. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thanks, Kieran. That's great. Now I move on to Colm Markey, and Colm is the MEP for Fine Gael for Midlands Northwest. He became MEP in November 2020 following Mairead McGuinness's move to the European Commission. And prior to this, he was a member of Louth County Council from 2009 to 2020, serving as chairperson from 2017 and into 2018. He's a strong interest in agriculture and community development and is a former president of Macra na Firma. So Colm, over to you.
Thanks very much, Stephen. I'm delighted to be here, delighted to have the chance to engage with various organisations. I suppose Stephen mentioned some of my background. Obviously, I have a strong background in agriculture and the farming organisations, but also a strong background in the like of leader development companies, community development in general, and if you like, rural regeneration in areas like that. So all of that is very important to me, and I suppose very important. The sustainability of organisations like your own is something that I see as critical in terms of, it's a very Irish thing to have organisations like yours, and I think the voluntary contribution people make, but also just that sense of community that people get involved in. I think it's something uniquely Irish, the level of that there is, and I think it's something we have to manage and continue to develop. Just from my own perspective, I suppose people are talking committees, because in fairness to the European Parliament, committees are a big part of how things operate. At my end, agriculture, transport, fisheries would be my main committees. And also I'm on an interparliamentary body between Britain and the European Parliament on Brexit. And also I'd have an interest, no different than Kieran, I'd have a particular interest in renewable energies. I suppose particularly coming from the fact that I'm on the Transport Committee, and I've recognised that we have to, decarbonise transport in a big way, and we have to find the solutions to make that happen. So I also think we've enormous potential, particularly off the west coast of Ireland, in generating renewable energies from wind, and I suppose on the other side then through agriculture as well. In terms of some of the work that I've been doing, just at the moment, I'm actually dealing with a file in relation to large infrastructure spends and how we look at the big capital projects, and particularly in the transport area across Europe, and whether we're getting value for money on one side. And equally, the other big issue that probably the other two big issues that come along are, if you like, delays, the issue with delays and the rollout. I think the figures, there was an analysis done recently, and there's an average of 11-year delay on large infrastructure projects, and I think it was a 47% overrun in cost. So clearly there's issues that need to be addressed there. And I suppose the other big area then was in relation to it was the idea of, if you like, ensuring that that these things are rolled out effectively and planned enough in advance, really. And that's pre-planning is a key part of it. Alongside that, I also, through the Agriculture Committee, would have done a lot of work in relation to food security in Africa, where we were looking at identifying, if you like, how Europe doesn't negatively impact on indigenous African food production, and equally then how we, I suppose, the balance between food sovereignty and food security and how you make them two work effectively together. So that would be that side. Then within the agriculture side of it, I suppose the big issue for me is around the whole challenge of sustainability and how we create a sustainable model of agriculture going forward. Have been looking at things like carbon farming, like obviously we've a major challenge with methane through our livestock and how we address that issue. They would be two particular areas I would have had a big focus on in the Agriculture Committee. We're also looking at the moment around the whole area of fertilisers. I suppose post the Ukrainian war, current, I won't say post, it's not over yet, hopefully it'll be over soon enough. But as a result of the Ukrainian war, we find ourselves with a great increase in costs of the like of production of fertilisers. But probably more importantly, we recognise the fact that we have to, if we're to create a sustainable model of agriculture into the future, we have to wean ourselves off dependency on chemical fertilisers and how we can go about that. And there's probably a good story from Ireland in relation to that, the use of the like of clovers and more sustainable methods. But outside of that, I suppose on the fishery side, a big involvement at the moment in trying to protect Irish fisheries to a 15% reduction with quota during as a result of Brexit, and we're looking at different ways of which we can redress that. I suppose through the Brexit Adjustment Reserve, the money that was made available, 1/3 of the fleet has been decommissioned, so it just indicates how big of an impact it's having on fisheries. And I suppose to redress that in some ways, there's a current battle on with Norway to protect Irish waters from Norwegian entry to access some of our fish stocks, and indeed to give Ireland greater quotas in that regard. So basically there will be some of the areas, obviously like everyone else, we're cutting across a whole broader range of agenda, but for me I suppose the rural and the agriculture, the transport, fisheries as a specific, and business and how Brexit impacts on business are probably some of the main areas I'm involved in. So maybe that gives a little picture.
Thanks, Colin. Grace O'Sullivan is next, and Grace is a Green Party MEP for the South constituency, having previously been a senator in Shannon. And prior to politics, Grace was an activist with Greenpeace and travelled across the world, taking part in actions for peace and climate justice. She's also worked as an environmental education specialist. So, Grace.
Thank you very much, Stephen, and thanks to Thomas from the European Parliament Liaison Office, who has always been very supportive to us MEPs, particularly during COVID, in terms of providing a facility for us in Dublin to address the European Parliament. And hello to everyone from the CSOs. And for me, civil society groups are hugely important in terms of engagement, but also in terms of informing us what's happening on the ground. And as Kieran said, in terms of engaging with us, he used the word lobby, which is funny because, you know, in a sense, because sometimes people think the lobbyists are all the kind of big pharma or fossil fuel companies, but the lobby is anyone who comes to us and who seeks our assistance to try to improve the conditions for communities on the ground. All of your communities, and your communities are our communities. So whatever we're doing, we try to do the best and get the best for everyone. So also hi to all my colleagues. Look, because I haven't been on with you for a long time, I just want to kind of set a quick context. You know, it's Ireland 50 years in the EU now, the EC, 30 years in the single market, which was a big issue, talking point in the European Parliament over the last number of weeks. And since we were elected, we've had Brexit, which we thought was going to be the biggest issue facing us in this mandate of 5 years, and it's paled very much into a particular significance because since then we've had COVID, we've had the war of aggression, we have the war of aggression against Ukraine at the moment. So it's been a very interesting dynamic time, I believe, to be in the European Parliament. At the moment, just so you know, Sweden holds the presidency of the European Council until June. And one of their political priorities is they've committed to working in partnership to improve the reform of the EU migration and asylum rules. And the reason I bring that up is because over the last number of weeks, it's an area I have focused very much in on. And I went to the island of Lesbos. And the reason I did that was because when I was elected to the European Parliament, very soon afterwards, I was contacted by an Irish person, Sean Binder. Now, Sean is a German citizen. That's his passport. But he grew up in Castle Gregory in Kerry. And so he had been telling me about the fact that he had been in prison for 100 days in Greece because he had gone down after college, after he'd finished his in Trinity College and done a law degree in the London School of Economics, and he went down to do give of his time to help migrants in the Mediterranean Sea. So he was one of the very, very unfortunate people who was arrested in 2018 and August 2018 and charged and accused of criminal activities in his support of humanitarian search and rescue work to protect migrants. So so just, I suppose, to reach out to yourselves. So that's like how we members of the European Parliament can get involved in very very on the ground work, and how we can influence processes and procedures within the member states, the 27 member states. So look, the whole I suppose ambition and direction of the European Union is that we work in solidarity and unity. So, so I felt that I should work with other parliamentarians to support the case, the case of criminalisation of humanitarians. So I managed to get 89 plus MEPs supporting putting pressure on the European Commission and on Greece and Italy in turn to try to look at the case of the criminalisation of humanitarian workers, search and rescue workers. And just to finish off on this, so the political priority of the Swedish presidency until June now is to look at the integrating and having cohesive rules around migration and asylum, and then to come up with a new migration and asylum pact that's fit for purpose, fit for 2023 going forward. So I spoke in plenary about that this week and took the lead in the Green Group on it. The committees I'm involved in is the ENVI Committee, the Environment, Public Health and Food Safety. This week, Commissioner Sinkevicius came into our committee. We talked about the the Montreal meeting there recently before Christmas, where they talked about a global biodiversity framework. So we are we're in planetary trouble in terms of climate change, global warming, and that's impacting on biodiversity. And as it happens, we're part of that big biodiversity chain. So, so there's a new global biodiversity framework which will influence the direction of the European Union. As Barry said, I'm involved with him on the Sustainable Development Goals, the global goals, and then I've been the rapporteur on a piece of legislation, the 8th Environment Action Programme to 2030, and that sets out a direction for the European Union in how we move towards 2030 in terms of climate adaptation, mitigation, pollution, circular economy, consumption and production, and that area. So I got some really good language in that legislation around that we stop using taxpayers' money to fund harmful activities. So activities like funding fossil fuel companies, funding a range of different types of activities that are actually pushing us in the wrong direction, and that we use taxpayers' monies to push us towards, as Kieran was saying, renewable energies, as Colin was saying as well, in a green direction, in line with the European Green Deal, the flagship of this commission. And so I was glad in that piece of legislation, the European Commission agreed to, based on my pressure on them, to come up with a healthy soil law. So in the European Union, we have laws for the quality of the air, we have laws for the quality of water, but we have no legislation on healthy soil. So Commissioner Sinkevicius gave me an undertaking that he would come out with that in 2023. And then this week he told me he would have it, the proposed legislation before us in June. So that's important for all of us in terms of the earth and the soil, but particularly and obviously for agriculture in Ireland and horticulture and food production. And then the other committee I'm on is the Fisheries Committee, which is called PESH. And that, I suppose, I would be seen in the European Parliament as one of the outspoken people in terms of healthy oceans. That, as I say, you know, there'll be no fish in the sea if we don't have good quality water, coastal, offshore, and that. So I know there's people on the call like Seamus Bonner and that who I would have been in consultation with very often. And so we're working in fisheries on the control. I'm the shadow rapporteur for the Green Group on the control file and control regulation. So we're hoping under the Swedish presidency to wrap that up by March. It's been going on since the beginning of the mandate. I absolutely agree with what Colin was saying there. You know, we have to make sure that that there is good support mechanisms for fishers in Ireland, particularly small-scale fishers. And we have the Brexit Adjustment Fund, which I fought very, very hard to make sure Ireland got the lion's share of that money. And now we need to see those funds going in to support fishers in Ireland. And then the other thing is I work on marine protected areas. And again, that I see that as a win-win because once we have those identified and we have areas that are protected and in some areas that are restored, then again, that'll help for, you know, in terms of spawning grounds for fish, for biodiversity and for marine life, which is good for us as well. So that's just a few of the things that I'm working on at the moment. But thanks very much again for the opportunity to interact and engage with you today. Thanks.
Thanks, Grace. Thanks very much. And finally, I'll hand over to Maria. Maria Walsh is the Fine Gael MEP for Midlands Northwest. She's Vice President of the LGBTI Rights Group in the Parliament, co-chair of the Mental Health Alliance and the Coalition of Mental Health and Wellbeing Intergroups. And Maria previously worked in television production and creative management. So Maria, floor is yours.
Thank you. Thanks, Stephen. And hello to everyone. Hello to my colleagues, but and most importantly, hello to all our organisations that are joining us. Similar to how Grace had started her Cúpla Focal, just want to say, well, happy 50th anniversary to us all as we celebrate 50 years of being in a family that has created such positive change for our own island, and continues to need to deliver on that on that change also. Conscious that we're at 12:37, so I'll keep my few short words short. I say that now Who knows what's going to happen in the next few? But from a committee standpoint, and many I've already connected with, particularly the Europe Direct Libraries, and in my previous life as a well-withered Rosa Tralee, I would have worked very closely with Plan Ireland. But equality, education and mental health. And ultimately, I think from all of our sides is the development of our country. And for me, it's looking at regional development. But how that impacts and where I take that into my work is, as I think everybody had mentioned, in particular Colm, we sit on specific committees, mine being the Employment and Social Affairs Committee. And within this, we cover everything from access to employment, particularly looking at that entrepreneur. And a statistic that stuck with me since the 2019 elections, that 60% of our businesses in small towns and villages are run by women, and yet not all funding at local, national, European level is appropriate for the business they're growing, which for me is frustrating, because if we didn't have those businesses within our small towns and villages, then you see all of those, the schools reducing, you see community spirit and that mehel that we often talk about and very proud of from an Irish standpoint disappearing. So within the Employment Committee, that's where a lot of my work lives. I just wrapped up a file with other colleagues on pay transparency. So while I mentioned at my outset 50 years on, and actually by entering into the European Economic Community at the time was the removal of the marriage bar, unfortunately, we still have an immense separation between men and women's who do the exact same job are not receiving the exact same money for that work. So pay transparency was a directive that was set. We closed it in the Czech presidency. So you would have heard Grace talk about the Swedish presidency, in the presidency that just finished at the end of December. And aim of the game is to reduce that 14% pay gap. The next iteration of that work is on the pension gap. And I think for any of us, particularly any organizations that are working with women, this is something incredibly important for the EU, but most importantly for ourselves here in Ireland. Another committee that I work on is the Culture and Education Committee. And here we talk about Erasmus Plus. And ultimately, how are we breaking it down? Sadly, we welcome more Erasmus Plus students into Ireland than actually we send to other EU countries. And the deficit of that, and European Movement Ireland is phenomenal at talking about Erasmus or other traineeships and apprenticeships. And I know Thomas will also get into it in his words. But the deficit of that is we do not have enough people, young people, looking at the EU as an opportunity for them. So then, like my generation finishing college in 2007, 2008, they're heading off to the likes of America, Canada, and Australia, New Zealand, where in actual fact, if we could keep them and celebrate them within the 27 member states, we have a much better opportunity to grow in all the areas that my colleagues have already shared. So Erasmus Plus is incredibly important, not to look at certain highbrow universities, but look at the GTRBs, look at different levels of third level, look at those with different abilities. And in my space of mental health, trying to break down the barriers that if someone has or is currently going through mental health and wellbeing support, that they too see Erasmus Plus as an opportunity also. So within the education and culture, that is one of my priorities there. For anybody who I've had the privilege of speaking with before, mental health is the one area I really feel from an Irish standpoint that we can impact change from a European Union standpoint. Day one of school, though, in 2019, I was told it's not seen as the competency, but there's always ways to massage how we look at competencies. And I think my colleagues can also agree. It's literally just how we talk about it and how we raise awareness. And ultimately across the EU, particularly in Ireland, we do have expertise. We do have a want and a wish, and organisations like yourselves that want to see the statistic that is quite harrowing, that the second leading cause of death in our EU right now for 10 to 19-year-olds is death by suicide. And that is a horrific statistic that if we do not get a grapple of we could talk about and send MEPs and work on our committees till the cows come home, but we do not have generations coming over and coming up in the EU that feels themselves, that is able to show up as themselves and get the support when they need it. I'll wrap up, Stephen, in just a second, but I do want to, within this conversation, and hopefully after, if anybody wants to continue this directly with myself and my office, we have a serious issue, I believe, with connecting what happens at an EU level and what's happening at home. And the issue with that is the rise we see in hate speech, online and offline, the impact it's having on our democracy, and the impact that's having on other political landscapes, both east and west of us. And many colleagues talked about the war against Ukraine, but we also have democratic wars in various other countries. The United States right now, in terms of polarization, would be one. And ultimately, this is where we need to lean into each other to figure out how best to communicate to our networks and to those that are seeing themselves and hearing themselves and feeling that support within the political landscape, particularly at a European Union, given that we are 50 years on. 70% of our legislation at an Irish level comes from EU. So this is a really incredible, important conversation. And I just want to acknowledge Stephen and the co-ed at European Movement Ireland and Thomas and the EPLO, because without this and without this network, then things like the European Year of Skills and Training that we're currently celebrating, hopefully next year an EU year dedicated to mental health, citizens' dialogues on mental health that is due to be announced by the Commission in June of this year. All of those things do not impact our citizens on the ground, which is where they need to. Thanks, Stephen. My 2 minutes became 10 minutes, so apologies about that.
No worries at all, Maria. Thanks a million, and thanks to all the MEPs.